Welcome back, everyone, to Integrating Real Perspective, my film review corner on YouTube. And today I'm going to be reviewing the 2016 movie Passengers, which is a movie I've wanted to review for quite a while now because it's one of the most elegant fusions of sci-fi, space opera, and romance, featuring two very attractive stars in Jennifer Lawrence and Chris Pratt. It's quite a beautiful film, that makes you wonder what it would be like to be stranded on a sort of island paradise where the only other company you have is another person. It's the perfect character study, really, on one man, one woman, alone together, and the things they have to do to help and support each other when there is no one else around. You're having to look at the dynamics that play out between a man and a woman, the two sexes that we've only known in existence, and um, all the wonderful and incredible times as well as the challenges that they have to face in each other when they realize that they're the only two within this environment. And in the case of Passengers, they've left Earth for another world. In this movie, that other world would be called Homestead 2, and the spaceship that they're on is called the Avalon. So J Law and Chris play Aurora and Jim, who both wake up prematurely during an event when a meteor strikes the Avalon. Well, okay, so Jim is actually the first and only passenger to wake up due to his hibernation pod failure. Aurora gets woken up a year later by Jim himself. And I can't say that I blame him, seeing as how he was alone with just this charming android bartender named Arthur, played by Martin Sheen. Now, this movie, while it does have a pretty basic storyline, is one where I think you can project your own subjective experience based on your own emotional bias, and you're still right. But it can also differ depending upon whether you're male or female. If you're a man, you'll likely see the film through Chris Pratt's eyes. Vice versa, if you're a woman, then you be seeing the film through J-Law's eyes. Both of the characters' beliefs, their intentions, their feelings, their dreams, their whole worldview. It's broken down between these two genders, and ultimately, as you immerse in the ever-growing relationship between the two over the next 2 hours, you develop less of an I or a you bias and more of a we bias emerges. So there is no two people. There's only one unified being of light that has built a home for each other in their hearts and souls. And so, regarding the story, the spaceship vessel Avalon is on a 120-year journey to Homestead 2 with 5,000 other passengers and 238 crew members. The captain, who arrives on the scene over an hour into the film, is Gus, played by Lawrence Fishburne, and he too has a hibernation pod malfunction. The reason why so many people are on the ship is because they all volunteered to start a whole new life off Earth because Earth wasn't really providing the circumstances needed to pursue their dreams. Which sounds like a cheesy marketing ploy here, especially considering how expensive it is to use certain services on the ship, such as paying a couple $1,000s to make a telephone call back to Earth, which then, of course, will take like several decades to reach Earth and several more decades to, send a message back to the ship, a return call back to the ship. Jim even surmises that the corporation that funded this trip was banking off of people's sorrow and misery for living a desolate and meaningless life on Earth. It's like basically the ultimate pyramid scam. What better than to persuade people to leave the only home planet they've ever known and to venture off onto another world, going into deep hibernation the whole time. So you have to basically trust the corporation that for your entire 120-year sleep, everything is going to be fine. Like the ship itself is self-sustaining. That being said, it is still a great adventure to get to explore another planet and venture into deep space. Plus, the Earth was having the usual problems with ecocide and resulting in the collapse of the biosphere. Nothing new here, obviously. I reviewed the movie After Earth a while back, so that movie came out 3 years before Passengers. So, I mean, the whole collapse of the biosphere themes kind of become a cliche thing that's been running throughout the 2010s. But meanwhile, like I said, the ship itself is self-sustaining, or so it seems, because 90 years from reaching Homestead 2 is when Jim wakes up. So he basically wakes up only 30 years into the mission. And he's paranoid at first when he wakes up. He searches every inch of the ship to find that there are no other passengers around. But when he comes across Arthur, and that's when he starts to mellow out. And, he manages to indulge in fun activities like partaking in a virtual dancing contest and playing basketball and even going ship diving off the edge in zero gravity with a tether on. He tries out the sushi bar and indulges in whatever food the ship has to serve. So basically, he's living a life of leisure, and like every day, it's just he's trying to find new ways to have fun. But then a year passes by, and he starts to feel empty, depressed, nihilistic. He begins to think that life has no meaning or purpose, and he starts to contemplate suicide. He even lets his hair and his beard grow out. And then at the point when he attempts to commit suicide by, jumping out of the airlock and getting sucked out without a suit on, he changes his mind. He runs back into one of the pod rooms. He slips on an empty glass bottle that he just cast aside in one of the pod rooms. And where the bottle rolls towards this specific pod, there she is, lying in her pod like a sleeping beauty, a lioness with this ethereal, luminous aura, which at that point, he has to see about getting her out of the pod. And this is Aurora, of course. Now, I want to take a moment to share my personal poetic experience with this film. So, I've been living on disability benefits since 2020, since March of 2020. And in a lot of ways, my life has become more peaceful and tranquil, much like as if my apartment building is the Avalon ship. I actually had a kind of Jim Preston moment after watching this movie because I had to visit the library. And as I walked across the parking lot to my car, I saw that there was no one around. It was a little after 7 in the evening, and the sun was setting, which just created this beautiful painting like look where like the sky was nice and blue and clear with just light clouds in the sky. My reason for going to the library was because of this Mandela effect that I had. There's a scene in the movie where Jim sends an AI cleaning robot with a note attached to it, where he navigates with the remote control to Aurora's room. And I realize I'm jumping around here with the plot, but just hear me out. The note contains a simple date proposition asking her, "Dinner tonight?" Blushing and smiling with flattery, she asks the robot, "Is Jim asking?" And then Jim, from a distance, moves the remote lever to get the robot's head to nod. And then Aurora writes in response to Jim's proposal on the note, "Love to." Okay, so now this lady friend of mine that I am doing this film review for is a Tove Lo fan. And I thought it was interesting because I was at karaoke night with her at my local downtown club a couple of nights earlier. And then it struck me like lightning. Ha! Tove Lo is a spoonerism for love too. Basically, what I mean is if you switch the first letter of both words, so if you switch L and T around, you get love to or Tove Lo, which I mean is basically love too, but the T and the L are flipped around. So I just knew that I had to start checking out her music. And that's why I decided to visit my library and check her somewhat recent CD from 2022, Dirt Femme. I actually do know Tove Lo's music, at least in passing, mainly through her session work that she's lended with Coldplay as the most obvious example. She sings background vocals on the song Fun. Duran Duran on their 2021 album Future Past, she sings background vocals on Give It All Up. She co-wrote the infamous Ellie Goulding hit, Love Me Like You Do, a 2015 song from her Delirium album, which was featured in both 50 Shades of Grey and 50 Shades Freed from the trilogy based off of E.L. James's books. And despite my complicated feelings about Allegiant, the third and final film from the Divergent trilogy, I did really enjoy Tove's contribution to the soundtrack with the song Scars, which she plays during that very beautiful, lush, and colorful end credit scene of the film. But that's her session work that she's done with pretty high profile artists that I know really well as high profile films that I watch too. I've never listened to any of her official solo CDs though, and that's why I thought, I'll give this particular CD a try. And that's, I mean, I've actually got it sitting right here. Yeah, so I've decided to check out Dirt Femme here. Um, I've only gotten 6 songs in. I don't have a review set for that CD. I don't know if I'm going to make a review for that CD because I don't know if I'm a Tove Lo fan. I like her voice. She's got this really sweet but sad and sultry and sensual vocal style that I really like. And the work that I've heard her do was pretty incredible so far, especially the collaboration with Coldplay. Because Fun is like one of my top 10 favorite Coldplay songs of all time. And I've been listening to Coldplay since I was a junior in high school. That goes back like over 20 years ago. Well, so maybe someday I'll do a review of that CD and I'll check out some more of her work. But now, as I was driving to and from the library, I I was enjoying myself, looking forward to taking in new sensory information, a la a Tove Lo CD that I've never heard before, a new outlet for indulging my sensual world, being the Taurus that I am. My zodiac sign is a Taurus. But as always, my mind drifts towards all the summer girls walking around in their short skirts, bearing a lot of skin as part of the skin parade. And because of my social disability with high functioning autism, and my inability to really establish a point of escalating things from intrigue to rapport to attraction, I feel that most of these girls are asleep to my presence, much like the 5,000 passengers aboard the Avalon. So yeah, I know that was a bit of a confessionary story, but I just had to include that anecdote into this review because that's how personal this movie is to me ever since I watched it for the first time in 2021. And so just as with Jim discovering Aurora and then waking her up from her slumber to take away his terminal loneliness and give his life new meaning, open the door and letting more sunlight into his elevated existence, he's able to now experience another human, not an android like Arthur or some AI cleaning bot or some uh, virtual tour guide. Nothing like that at all. No, no, no technological devices taking the place of human interaction. Someone instead with a bright personality, brimming with wonder and amazement about life. That's definitely what describes Jennifer Lawrence's character. Aurora, you see in the film, was a journalist back on Earth who was close to her dad. And he himself was a storyteller who always believed that you should never have a boring life. You should seek adventure and always have some exciting story to tell. Never be ordinary. Yeah, because ordinary lives tell ordinary stories, which is what I believe Jennifer Lawrence says in that film. That's a line that she says. And that's why in that scene in the cafeteria, she's sitting down across from Jim and interviewing him on why he decided to leave Earth. But she doesn't entirely frame it as an interview, but just more of a conversation. She's curious about him. And the thing with Jim is that, as far as I know, he didn't really have a whole lot going on in his life, but he does love to learn about things. And that's how he starts to become kind of a mechanic by default aboard the Avalon, who's able to like fix things and even create things. I mean, he even becomes like his own gardener at one point and plants a tree. He like lays down the soil foundation um and plants the seeds that are needed. And then I don't think it was a real tree from what I remember. I think that was just like an AI simulation of it, but I mean the dirt was certainly real, because there's that one point where he's interacting with Arthur and he's like really he's like full of dirt stains all over his body. It's yeah, that's really funny. Back to J Law. Curiosity is a trait I've always noticed with her roles over the course of her career. Like Joy Joy Mangano in the 2015 movie Joy, where her curiosity for how people keep a clean home led to her invention of the self-wringing mop. I couldn't help but notice a bit of the Joy character in Aurora as the movies came out a year apart. And Jennifer did carry over a bit of that role as a memento to wear on her sleeve. That soft, bleeding heart type that emphasizes for the unfortunate and the misfitted, which is why in Passengers, Aurora develops a romantic attachment to Jim. And now life starts to have meaning for her as well. Anyhow, just as with my anecdote that I shared earlier, I wish I could have an experience like that with a woman. I wish I could meet a woman like Aurora, really. Yet here I am, 38 years old, still single with no kids, and, you know, problems with my gut that, I'm trying to work out right now to, get this service done. Um, um, Obviously, you don't really need to know all the gross details about that, but um, you know, obviously, there's like a lot of emotions from from trauma that I experienced growing up that were stored inside my gut, have that have made digestion get cramped up, that that has made detoxing impossible for me. Those sorts of things, are, the reason why. Okay, so I'm just going to mention that currently right now I'm actually seeing a gut doctor who's going to look at my stool and my saliva to see like what sorts of problems there are as far as gut bacteria goes and how that can get balanced out with like getting a specially made diet plan, as well as knowing what kind of exercise I should do, and um, you know, um, incorporating yoga and Tai Chi into it. I don't know exactly what's all going to be happening because I'm still waiting for my for Iris to see if I can get the money that I need to be able to pay for this. Um, but anyways, yeah, that's that's a little bit of my personal life right there. It can't help but just kind of overlap into the events that go on in this movie. Uh, Lawrence Fishburne obviously is a character that ends up getting really sick with um, after his hibernation pod malfunctions and he wakes up prematurely. But yeah. Anyways, back to Jim and Aurora. They spend their time together, having fun, trying out new foods. She discovers the pool and swims a lot. And, then when they sleep together, they have this TV screen on that shows a virtual natural landscape so as to at least provide them with a glimpse of what Homestead 2 will look like when they arrive. And yet, inevitably, things don't stay that way forever. Over an hour into the film, Arthur has a robot moment when he reveals that he really doesn't have emotions. He's always been programmed to be a charming bartender who is meant to serve others, which also means that he tells the truth. He's like an artificial, intelligent Jiminy Cricket. And however innocent he may be about telling the truth, he can't really process the consequences of how it can end up hurting people. That's exactly what happens when he lets out how Jim was always looking forward to meeting Aurora when he first saw her. This is happening when Aurora is sitting alone at the bar table talking to Arthur. Now, this pulls the curtain back for Aurora as it now dawns on her that she never woke up at the same time as Jim. It wasn't just by mutual chance that the two met on the Avalon. It was only Jim, and it was he who read the manual for opening her pod to wake her up. So all of a sudden, the honeymoon is over. Yeah, all of a sudden now, the invisible rose on the thorn starts to prick Aurora. And oh, how this hurts, how it upsets her. She gets completely paranoid and throws a vase against a window in her room. She starts thinking that he's trapped her on the Avalon. Okay, so personally, from my bias for this review, I am going against the grain of the controversies that I've been seeing online about this particular point in the movie and the decisions that the director and writers made from this point through to the end. I think Aurora acts rather overdramatic here. Yes, I am one of those reviewers who is striking back against the controversy surrounding the film in its third act. Now, you have to understand something about Jim's intentions to let Aurora out prematurely. Why would the haters of this movie be so cold and indifferent towards Jim's alienation? Have they not thought about that? Politics aside, gender politics aside, doing something wrong so as to survive does eventually become the right decision when it becomes clear that it's what the other person actually wants. Aurora wanted to be with Jim as much as Jim wanted to be with Aurora. Jim just had to wake that ideal man up inside her imagination. He had to bring her imagination to life. She's a journalist. She's a writer. So she thrives off the story of another person's life. And she sees herself being drawn into the world of her subject. That's exactly what was going on in that cafeteria scene when she was interviewing him. And, discovering that unlike her, who already had a real sense of what she wanted to do with her life, Jim just kind of learned things here and there and wasn't really even sure of himself until he realized that he could be a mechanical engineer and has helped to learn to fix things on the Avalon and also to to build like this nice tree for her to look at, so at least to make her feel like she's taken a little bit of a chunk of Earth back home with her. And here, yeah, I'm referencing my NASA shirt here, which I thought was the perfect headliner for this movie. Even though this has nothing to do with NASA, I'm sure like, you know, this this shirt has some sort of connection to that. But okay, yes. So yeah, I can just anticipate people watching this video now. Well, ready to quote that line from Mother when J-Law screams out, "You only love me because I loved you," which is what she says to Javier Bardem's character, who plays her husband. And that movie was released in 2017, which makes me wonder if she chose to do that role as a rebellion against her seemingly gaslighted character in Passengers. I'm sure there's a lot of crazy theories out there. But the deal is, love is never safe. That's what Jennifer Love Hewitt said in Ghost Whisperer. It's always messy, but given the living conditions that both Jim and Aurora were living under, they also had to deal with challenges that they would have to face together as a test of their love. And that becomes really apparent when Gus arrives on the scene. Now, okay, with the captain of the ship around to check up on things, he diagnoses the technical faults going on and discovers that the ship is on its way towards gradual self-destruction. And Gus dies shortly before he can even come up with a solution to save the Avalon. He suffered from the pod hibernation malfunction, the worst of the three. Like Jim and Aurora were lucky to come out as healthy as they were, compared to Gus. Um, a note about the director, by the way, if I may go off on a tangent here slightly. Mortem Tildum is a Norwegian director whose film credits include The Imitation Game, which was that Benedict Cumberbatch film, which had come out in 2014, I believe. It did come out at least a year or two before Passengers. That film was about the life of Alan Turing, who had invented the first supercomputer during, I think it was World War II. It was a computer that was used to interpret messages that the Germans were sending out about where they were going to be dropping their bombs. Wonderful movie, by the way. I only saw that film once, but I gotta revisit that film again and see, just like how Mortem Tildum's directorial style holds up in the same way that it did for Passengers. Because Passengers, of course, has that very, very ethereal and very, transcendent look to it. But the Imitation Game was clearly made with the intent of being grounded in reality. Why I'm even bringing this up is because um, Alan Turing in that movie was gay. So, given that Mortem handled the material in that film with respect to his gender politics, it would be a stretch to say that he was acting out of hand with his choices of character execution between Jim and Aurora. I saw one article where there was like an entire activist group saying that, oh, this movie promotes date rape. Fuck that. Sheesh. Mortem obviously cares about power dynamics and treating his actors with respect, honoring their wishes of consent. And, he's Norwegian. The Swedish and Sweden is next door to Norway. So they're known for having a very liberal stance on sexuality. So Mortem knew what he was doing, as far as like planning out the beats for the story, as far as how the romance would gradually come together over time. The choices that would be made on Jim's part that would lead him to bring Aurora out of hibernation so as to have a partner with him to keep him company, to help him to find direction and purpose in life from the otherwise nebulous existence of living in deep space for the next 90 years. Okay, now, however indifferent J Law may have been, um, she did express regret for the role, saying that, "Oh, I I I don't regret the fact that I was in this movie, but had I read into the role a little bit more deeply, um, I would have made a different decision to not be in this film." Well, here's the thing, J Law. I love you. I've loved a lot of your movies that you've been in, um, some more than others, but your decision was made, and this film has been out in the cinematic stream for 8 years now. Eight, yeah, count those fingers on my hand. 8 years. There is no going back. And I happen to be a person who loved the way this movie was made. And I love the way that the movie ended. So that's that. I often think of the film Mandy, which came out in 2018, where Nicolas Cage and Angela Riseborough's characters have this idyllic relationship that started off as two people who were wounded and traumatized. But it's those very wounds, their brokenness, that made them complete. It was like two halves of a heart that brought themselves together. The same thing applies to Jim and Aurora's relationship. Jim was alone, much like Tom Hanks in Castaway. That's another good cinematic example right there. I mean, Tom Hanks having to leave behind Helen Hunt after hopelessly losing after coming back from being stranded on an island for 4 years, which was I don't really see that as being his fault because he had an obligation to his work. But then, he's like driving on this country road and he meets this random woman, along the way. And, the last scene is him looking in the distance after helping this woman to find her direction. And you see that look in his face, like, should I pursue this girl? I feel like that was a sign right there. So we obviously don't know what happens next because the ending is ambiguous, but I still think that was another good example right there to show that finding the ideal mate so as to make life bearable while having to weather the isolation of being in deep space, it doesn't happen according to some fixed gender emotional dogmatism. You should really check, for those watching this review, I highly encourage you to check out Montauk Chia. He has a section in his book, Taoist Secrets of Love, Cultivating Male Sexuality, which does talk about, how important it is for men and women to coexist together, whether that's even being friends or friends with benefits, or partners for life. The the need to have a partner that fits the ideal equivalent of your gender opposite helps to bring in an alternate perspective on life that helps to bring more spontaneity and joy and beauty. Because really, you know, no man is an island unto himself, and every man needs to have a female partner of some sort, whatever that may be, friend, romantic partner, yeah, you know, friend with benefits. I hesitate to say fuck buddy, because that term's kind of gross. But just someone to really, really relate to that brings that feeling that element of life, that element of creativity and beauty, and wonder and light. And that is exactly what Aurora, Jennifer Lawrence's character, brought to the table. So, Yeah, J-Law, you can criticize the decision that was made to star in this film all you want, but I still think you were great and you were an inspiration to me. So now I'm moving on, getting back to the plot from where I left off. Jim has to take a risk, as any man usually would, with his own life to flush out this fire, which has been damaging the ship's engine core and thus maintaining stabilization of the ship's structure. And it goes awry when the turbulence of the airlock sucking the fire out drags him along with it. He's now adrift in space, and Aurora has to go out with a tether on her suit so as to pull him back inside the safety of the ship. And she has to resuscitate him too because he's technically declared dead for a while. As I see it, the plight they went through to save the ship is a justifiable clout to wipe clean any so-called date rape allegations made against Pratt's character, simply because you cannot deny the ideal for the highest love that both Jim and Aurora have for each other in the end. Jim actually persuades Aurora to volunteer to go back into hibernation afterwards, using the autodock as a new vessel for falling back asleep in. The autodock being the medical pod that checks the vital signs of patients and offered automated medical treatment to save Jim. But Aurora decides in the end that she wants to stay with Jim because she wouldn't forgive herself if Jim had to resume living alone again. They even have a nice funeral for Gus, which I thought was really touching as well. Kind of like that Star Trek themed funeral in space where they send out his casket out into deep space to float away. And then there's the ambiguous ending where the Avalon arrives at Homestead 2. There's no sights of either Jim or Aurora, but there's a few of the 5,000 passengers we get to meet. One of them played by Andy Garcia. Boy, can't remember this last time I saw that guy. Probably Pink Panther 2. Regarding Aurora's audio journal narration serving as the final dialogue for the movie, it seemed clear enough that they both stayed behind. But there's no evidence presented of two corpses sitting around on the ship, or that they just found a way to grow old gracefully through some anti-aging serum. And now they serve as teachers for the people to populate this homestead too, to help build a newer and better civilization. I don't know. But it did have a beautiful ending to it with the end credits showing cool 3D outer space scenes and nebulas, which had become a bit of a trend, it seemed, for a while between the early and mid to slightly later part of the 2010s. If you look at the movies like The Host and Earth to Echo, they also have end credit scenes with 3D outer space scenes, like something you would see out of an IMAX theater experience. And speaking of which, to offer my final thoughts on this movie, this film is a visual feast as such, with a very spacey new age score by Thomas Newman. That, given his work, on the rather sentimental dramas like Shawshank Redemption and American Beauty, and his work on Pixar movies like Finding Nemo, the sequel Finding Dory, and Wall-E, and as well as his sound um, being lent to the 007 movies Skyfall and Spectre, this movie does really benefit from being shown on an IMAX screen. And I don't really think it ever got that release, but it should have because the encompassing effect of being in space and the weight of the intimate connection with the two leads in the movie would have been a lot more enhanced. The emotional gravity would have been more amplified. The impact of that emotional gravity would have been a lot more amplified. Though I guess gravity wouldn't be the right word to use because there is that Imagine Dragons song played during the end credits called Levitate. So, really, more it's about releasing the gravity and allowing yourself to float in free fall upwards. But it's uh, it's obviously, a movie that really, just takes you out of your earthly element for 2 hours and just really, really teleports you to a different place altogether. With regards to my female friend that I made this review for, this is for you, Evie. I had always hoped that I would meet my counterpart who would see the film from my opposite but also complement my point of view exactly. Yeah. Thank you for inspiring me to review this film. You are my divine muse with a Sagittarius sun, Leo moon, Virgo rising, a glowing satyr blazing with fiery, feathery bows alongside my path. Thank you from this Taurus sun, Aries moon, Virgo rising. We are both passionate cinemaphiles for life. Avatars weaving our cosmologies from the silver screen into a new virtual reality. Yeah. And with that, also shout out to Mega Media Exchange. Here, yep, right here. As always, for those who have been following my videos, you know how wonderful this business is with their discount DVDs and Blu-rays and CDs, video games as well too. Almost 20 years of, well, when they used to be CD Max, of course, and then they became Mega Media Exchange. But I've always, looked to these guys for my one sole resource to build my cinematic library. Yeah. So, anyways, shout out to you guys. Shout out to you, Evie. And see you on the flip side, all you fellow reelers. That was my review for Passengers. And yeah, integrating real perspective out for today. Yeah. Ciao. Actually, let that be ciao, mucho amore. And for those who know Hungarian, suk szeretetet neked. Much love to you.